So I would like to talk about how to maximize publishing in CHEST. So my goal is to provide a set of guidelines to assess which journals, and specifically CHEST, will best suit your manuscript and make a substantial difference to your publication success. So and a lot of this is going to be pretty basic for you, but I want to discuss guidelines for dealing with factors that may influence your choice of submission, preparing the ideal manuscript using online submission systems, following directions and writing a good cover letter, avoiding silly mistakes to facilitate a smooth review process, revising your manuscript, and dealing with the rejection. So let's start with factors influencing submission choice. You should consider the journal's visibility and what it would do to enhance, your career. What's the focus of the journal? So how timely is the editorial office processing? What's the impact factor of the journal? What are your costs, if there are going to be any? And what do you know about the quality of the reviews? So let me tell you a little bit of information about CHEST. It is a high visibility journal. We actually were selected as one of the top 100 most influential journals in medicine and biology in the past 100 years. And we are actually the only respiratory journal to make that list. In a variety of surveys every single year. It's done by our advertisers who, they actually are advertisers for other journals also, but they send out surveys, validated questions. And we are the single most essential publication for clinicians in pulmonary disease. The second journal, which is way behind us, turns out to be the New England Journal of Medicine. Greater than 60% of manuscripts come from outside of the U.S. And Canada. Turns out that 54% of the acceptances come from outside of the United States and Canada. CHEST, as you know, is a clinical journal. It focuses on three major areas, so that's pulmonary, respiratory, critical care, and sleep. We're not looking for pure cardiology information, but cardiovascular interactions that relate to these or relate to antithrombotic therapy. We actually are a major go-to place for treatment of actually atrial fibrillation. On average, the first decision is made within 15 days, publication online within 14 days of acceptance for original research, and the print version of the paper comes about 3 months afterwards. Our impact factor is now 6.519. Author costs for color images and open access are there. It never ceases to amaze me that people should know that you have to pay for color. You submit all sorts of color graphs, not you, the authors submit color graphs, and then when we say, will you, pay it, they go like, of course not. So then we say like, well, then you better give us good quality black and white, or else we're not going to publish it. Sometimes the color is so important to the paper, and you submitted it, that we actually at the end won't publish the paper unless it, the color, is there. CHEST receives up to 3,500 manuscripts a year, twice as many as the second the respiratory journal, whoever that might potentially be. So just an enormous amount of papers. 60 to 80 original research papers, new ones a week. Acceptances rate since 2005 to 11 to 15%. When you and I had a conversation, it was 11%. Yours was 15%, and all of Israel was 15%. We're now between 11 and 15%. And I can't say this in a stronger way or emphasize it anymore. High priority on findings that are novel or advance the field. So advancing the field is you've done the first study and it really was important. It's a new mechanism, or your paper actually clarifies confusion that was already there. I tell this, it's like telling me, the first experience in your country with all of the countries of the world. It's like, unless it really edifies, and it can be generalized to everywhere, you know, it's got to be more than just in, you know, let's say your country. Here you can see the impact factor. So it has, you know, slowly gone up. We actually are in competition with ourselves. We want it to continue to go up. And if we continue to rise in the rank order, that's very nice, but we're not necessarily targeting anything other than being true to what we are, a clinical journal, and to improve the science that we actually publish. And as you know, the magic number is an impact factor of 5. When you hit an impact factor of 5, the journal has actually hit the higher echelon of quality journals. So we're there. Here we see impact factor rankings. So the last time that we had it, we basically, I'd like to say we're tied for second place in the respiratory area. We feature ourselves as a critical care journal because the ACCP is a critical care actually society. And we have just received word that actually we are now going to be listed as a critical care category journal. And so our impact factor would actually put us in second place at the present time as a critical care journal. We've looked at what the impact factor of the sleep journals are, and we basically are number 1 if there was a sleep category, but there isn't. As soon as there is, we will apply to also be categorized as a sleep journal. So what do you do to prepare the ideal manuscript? I would say develop a strategy to do that. I would encourage you to read every single one, or have your trainees read every single one of our medical writing tips of the month series. We have actually published over 45 of them. We initially were going to do it for those whose English was not you know, their first language, but it became very clear that nobody in the United States knows how to write. So, you know, all of those medical writing tips can be very helpful for even, you know, the U.S. Grads. Here are some of the you know, titles: how authors can cope with the burden of English as an international language, development of international standards for medical communications in English, some concrete ideas about manuscript abstracts, how to do an introduction, the methods and materials, graphs, a variety of things like that, how to do good references and write your discussion, backing up your states and how to perform literature searches, how to do, you know, what's the responsibility of authorship, talks about plagiarism, goodbye ghostwriters, registering a clinical trial, how you do it. We've actually had a couple on that. And abstracts for professional meetings are different than abstracts for, you know, let's say the journal, and it talks about how to do a good abstract for professional meetings. Know how to use online submission. And you know, maybe there are some journals left that don't have online submissions, but almost all journals are now using them. And how to do it and what to avoid are covered in our medical writing tips series. Make sure you do all that's requested of you, and the cover letter is really important. In your cover letter, you should be able to say, you know, this is a really important paper because, and don't say because it's like the first time we ever did what, you know, nobody else has ever done it. It's like, what does it mean to advancing the field? And then once you've done that, take a look at your paper. Did you say it and make that point really clear in, you know, in your abstract and the discussion? I mean, a lot of times, you know, you read it and go like, what the heck did they do here, you know? So I think saying it in as simple a terms as possible in the cover letter can actually help you in, you know, making sure that you've made that point in your paper. Don't forget your IRB approval statement and number. Why do we actually do that? Because people lied that they had IRB approval. How about that one? So we've basically seen it all. Conflict of interest disclosure form needs to be there, and a signed copyright release. The copyright release is the way that we get everybody, because you basically say that you did this, this, that, and this. You didn't do that, and then you went ahead and did something bad, and so you already attested to the fact, and all of the authors signed it saying that every single one of the authors, you know, was justified as being an author, and, you know, you never did anything wrong. Well, you actually sent us, you know, the way that we can actually, you know, get to your dean or your division chief or your chair and have them do something. And I already talked about, writing your cover letter and about how it's novel or advances the field. You must list for CHEST preferred expert reviewers because it helps us do that. To get 2 really good reviews, we generally have to send out 4 invitations. So if we have 80 new original research papers a week, that's 320 invitations that go out every single week for people to, review papers. Avoid silly mistakes and to facilitate a smooth review process. And at the very least, silly mistakes do lead to delays. I've gotten, papers. It's clear that we were not the first journal, and the cover letter was not changed. I'm still getting letters to the editor, to Jay Block, who actually stopped being the editor-in-chief in 2005. It just means that you really didn't, it's sloppy. It just like leaves a bad perception in someone's mind. Not having a cover letter, assigning a copyright to the wrong journal, having incomplete signatures. Forgetting your IRB approval statement. We'll say you didn't do it, we unsubmit the paper, send it back, then we get the paper back, you forgot to put the IRB statement in that, we send it back to you again after unsubmitting the paper. The 3rd time when you don't do it, we just reject the paper. Not having an abstract, doing the bibliography, according to somebody else's, format. Lack of spell check and grammar. Not adhering to the word count limit. So we actually have pretty strict, limits. We'll give a little bit on the initial submission. And then, so for 2,500 word, let's say, limit for original research paper, we'll get a paper that's 4,200 words. And so we'll unsubmit it, and then the person will get back to us saying, I couldn't possibly say the same thing in fewer words. How about if we make a deal? You review the paper, and if you like the paper, then we'll cut it down. So the answer is, no, we can't do that. Then the next thing is, well, I read the word counts in all of these, in everything that's been published, and your original research papers are not 2,500 words. Then the explanation is, when there's a request for revisions, they always ask you to add something else. So if we started out with 4,200 words and then we send it back to you, they ask you to do more stuff, and then the paper is 7,000 words. And so, yes, what we finally publish may not be what the original word limit was that we required you to meet, but we actually have a reason as to why we want you to be as brief as possible initially. And it's never a good idea to call me an asshole. It's never a good idea to do that. But I've been called worse than that. Know the journals frown upon and take duplicate and salami publications very seriously, so you should avoid them like the plague. Silly and worse mistakes. While most silly mistakes will not necessarily result in rejection, they will undermine the credibility of your efforts. On the other hand, some mistakes, like duplicate publications, self-plagiarism, using ghostwriters, ghost authors, and guest authors, can not only lead to rejection, but also embarrassment and worse. And I had already mentioned we now use plagiarism detection software. We actually picked up a manuscript that had 3 enormous paragraphs copied word for word from somebody else's work. We wanted to know how this possibly could have happened, and the explanation was it was a silly mistake. Intentional scientific misconduct is another matter entirely. It is much, much worse than a silly mistake. And we just started using image falsification detection software and found a gel that had multiple things wrong with it, including splicing, and moving the baseline actually of the lanes. So the role of the editors, editorial boards, and peer reviewers, I really have seen this, dedicated to advancing the field, improving patient care, educating the readers, dedicated to making sure the ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects embodied within the Declaration of Helsinki are strictly adhered to. The editors look for a variety of things: appropriateness for the journal, Is the topic relevant, timely, important, unique, and if so, how? After the H1N1 epidemic, was over, there were like, 40 million articles about, H1N1 that were published everywhere. So I would just say, if you are now thinking of putting together your series of what happened with the H1N1, pandemic experience in Israel, it's not timely. And so, people are worn out with, that particular topic. I just give that as an example because we're still getting, papers about the H1N1 epidemic. What type of paper and research is it? Obviously, the highest level of design is, an attractive thing. Randomized control, blinded, registered trials, meta-analyses. But, we again, if it hasn't been done before and it's a prospective or retrospective observational study, we're interested in that. Case series or single cases, I'll just come to that in a minute. We do publish those. But it's really important that you understand that publishing is changing. We haven't done a really great job. We're actually standardizing the reporting of a variety of different kinds of designs. And I'll just give you the example of, the consort, instructions, checklists, and actually formatting of, your methods. You need to follow those because that's what it says that we're looking for in the instructions to authors. And there's a formalized way of, doing, systematic reviews, even of, observational studies. And you have to follow the PRISMA guidelines for that. Did authors select the preferred reviewers? Again, we require you to do that. Just understand that your best friend, as a reviewer, is you're looking for somebody who really knows what they're talking about. I mean, there have been studies showing that preferred reviewers actually are probably tougher on you than, the non-preferred reviewers. It's not a good idea to actually have somebody on our associate editors group be a non-preferred reviewer. Probably a good idea to just not say it at all. I was actually submitted a cough paper, and I was a non-preferred reviewer. What? This is not smart. It's not smart. You missed the course on behavioral sciences. Is the study or paper intended for a specific department? We actually have instructions to authors, I'll say it again, that people generally don't read. If you had a review in mind, don't start writing the review that's going to be earmarked for chest unless you called us and said, is this topic a good idea for you? We actually have a backlog of invited, reviews and commentaries and editorials. So you need to know whether or not this is something that we haven't already, ended up inviting. So at this point in time, a couple of things can happen. The editor, me, reviews things and makes a decision based upon I know what we got in the hopper and what's about to happen. And so I might make a decision without sending it out, although I've reviewed it. Editor assigns things to the associate editor, so one of our associate editors could do that. Or we send it out because we think that it's got a chance to advance the field, and so we'll send it out for review. So now it gets to the reviewers. They have a checklist of things that they go through, and they basically go through similar things that the initial screen involved. Is the subject important to clinical chest physicians? So you shouldn't be sending an animal study that has no clinical implications whatsoever. Actually, funny story. So we started actually with 2 questions. We immediately eliminated it 3 months later. It was, the Blue Journal does this also, like, why is, how does this advance the field? We had, how does this advance the field, and what are the clinical implications? And they were so awful, and there was, I think that the bronchial thermoplasty box comment was a little bit over the top as to, the investigators were allowed to say whatever they wanted to say. It was like, bronchial maybe want to run out and do bronchial thermoplasty on myself, and I don't even have asthma. But, we got such outrageously, flattering things about the paper that I found myself spending hours rewriting these things, and then I was going to send it back to him. And then finally I hit the wall when, what are the clinical implications about this paper? And it was a pure clinical paper. And the answer was, there are no clinical implications about this paper. So we stopped. And actually, there's a study here for somebody, who might be interested in this. So read the paper, see what the boxes of those journals, that allow the authors to do whatever, to say what they're going to say, and just see how outrageous those, comments are. It's a little deviation from my talk here. Is the article suitable for publication in Chest? Is the writing acceptable? So they basically go through the same thing, and then they go through the title, they go through the abstract, the introduction, the purpose of the study, and if you have a trial that needs to be registered, that registration number needs to be at the bottom of the abstract. That's what the instructions are. Methods and materials, this covers a lot of information that I've already covered. And then, was permission obtained for using the instrument that you have used as your primary outcome, for example? So a health-related quality of life instrument, I believe I've already mentioned this. You can't modify somebody else's fully psychometrically copyrighted instrument. You can't do that. First of all, you can't do it legally, although, going to jail, I've not seen anybody get sued over that. But the other thing is that if you modified an instrument, you don't know how that instrument is actually going to perform. So, and actually, every single time you use a copyrighted, fully validated instrument, you need to actually do a Cronbach's alpha on the results to make sure in your population that it was actually, a valid instrument, a reliable instrument to be using. The discussion, you need to have limitations. Nobody has ever had a perfect study. So you need to add what the limitations or potential limitations of your study are. But don't report limitations being like so awful that nobody could possibly believe your study. So if you say what the potential limitations are, you then have to say why it is that we can still believe your results even though you have these. You have to defend, how you have overcome those limitations. So we've seen it like, my study is so awful, then it was like, well, why should we believe this study? And obviously it gets rejected. References, we don't reject things when you send us somebody else's references, formatted in a way but it's just takes up a lot of time for us. Tables, do they need to be there? Is the right stuff in the tables? And with respect to the abstract, we continue to see probably every week somebody who has a different result in the abstract than you have in the results section. Just makes us think that your research is sloppy and well, what's the real answer here? Statistics, the reviewers would often say, I'm pretty good in statistics, but they've used sophisticated stuff here, and you really need to get a biostatistical reviewer to take a look at this. So if we actually hadn't thought of it ourselves, we'll do that when the reviewer's not comfortable. And then, of course, you've all reviewed papers so that you know that there are confidential comments to the author. Every once in a while somebody writes something just horrendous in the comments to the author section, and we didn't pick it up and take it out. So we feel badly when that passes. We try and scrub the bad words and things like that. But they'll suggest that this is not going to advance the field, and it probably should be rejected. Understand that we have a priority score from 1 to 5. We're only publishing 4s and 5s. So if you get a priority score of 3, it's a pretty good score, but it's just not high enough to be competitive for where we are now with publishing things in Chest. Case reports. Make sure the case is unique. If there have been other cases described in the literature, then it's not unique. The acceptance rate for case reports is like 5%. 5 out of every 100 get accepted. 95 get rejected. The instructions to authors say this has to be the very first case ever, or there's a new mechanism. And we'll occasionally get, there are 5, this is the 5th case, that is being described. And then I look in the, references, and the first 4 were published in Chest. So it just isn't going to make, the criteria that we have to, for a publication of a case report. Do an exhaustive search in Medline to find similar duplicate cases. If the first case was published in Chinese and then it was, and then it was translated into English, we're going to hopefully be able to uncover that. But that's a duplicate publication, and that's a bad thing to do. So if it's been published in another language, it's like it's still been published before. If you have a case that really is of really good educational benefit, it shouldn't be submitted to the to case reports or case series part of the journal. It should be submitted to chest imaging and pathology for clinicians, or pulmonary or critical care pearls. If you're going to submit something to chest imaging and pathology for clinicians, and you submit the case without pathology, you didn't follow directions. So I mean, probably about maybe 15% of the time we get cases submitted there, and it needs pathology, so it unfortunately gets rejected. In case of revision, most submissions require some level of revision. Revise and submit it promptly. Respond to suggested revisions point by point in writing. Don't take criticism personally. Don't respond in an angry manner. And follow the instructions for resubmission. I am going to write a book at the end. You won't be in it, but In case of rejection, have a Plan B journal identified to submit to. 40 respiratory journals monitored with citation rates. Address suggestions and comments before submitting to another journal. Now, you may think that there is an unlimited supply of reviewers, and that in a certain area there are an unlimited supply of reviewers. It is not the case. And so there will be reviewers who've already seen an occasional paper that you submitted. And that reviewer may have spent 15 hours going over your paper to try and be as helpful as possible. And then all of a sudden we send that same paper of yours that got rejected from the other journal to that same reviewer who says, okay, I'll take a look at it again. And then they notice you didn't care about any one of their suggestions that actually were pretty good. Guess what that reviewer is thinking of you? He's thinking he needs to reject your paper again because he's got the same concerns that he had before. So it's really important that as painful as it is and as quick as you want it off your desk because it's painful because it came back, it's really important to actually think about it, and if there were good suggestions, to actually try and improve things. Now, you could say to me that that's not fair to me that you sent my paper to a reviewer. Has that happened to you? Oh, okay. Who's already seen my paper. Why would you do such a thing? And I can tell you why we do that. Because we already have the experience that a paper went to a journal. They said, this paper for this other journal is fatally flawed. The paper would then come to us, and guess what? We would send that paper out, and the reviewer would take a quick look at the paper and say, oh my God, in a 2-week period of time, the fatal flaws have disappeared. So we won't send it to just one person who says, I've seen this paper before. But this is an internal check for us because there's scientific misconduct out there. There are some unethical people who would actually just change their manuscript and figure that nobody would ever catch them again. So we actually encourage people, if they've seen a paper before, to take another look at the paper. Top journals have a relatively low acceptance rate. New England Journal of Medicine, the BMJ, accept about 10%. CHEST, as I have said, from 2005 to the present, has accepted between 11 and 15% for original research. And then ask the editor to reconsider if you truly have a legitimate reason. If we think you do have a legitimate reason for complaining, we wouldn't send it back out to the same reviewers again, although sometimes I've asked really high quality reviewers, what do you think about, the complaint that was there? And sometimes we'll say, okay, take another whack at it. I clearly made decisions saying, like, I can't guarantee the results, but we'll send it out for a fresh review as if this is a completely new submission that you sent us. Don't let your rejection deter you from submitting to that journal in the future. And again, as hard as it is not to take it personally, don't take it personally. I actually submitted a junior faculty person with me as a senior author, submitted a paper to CHEST. I had nothing to do with it, and it got rejected. So the junior faculty person said, like, I'm in deep depression. I would have thought that somehow, they would have accepted your paper. So I've had my own, as the editor-in-chief, papers in CHEST been rejected. In case of acceptance, congratulations. Your hard work and attention to detail have paid off. Thank you and good luck.